Geographic profiling is an investigative methodology used in cases of serial crimes such as serial murder, rape, arson, bombings. It analyzes the locations of crimes to determine where the offender responsible for them most likely lives. Now, geographic profiling can't solve a crime. There's only 3 ways to do that: an eyewitness, a confession, or physical evidence. The role of geographic profiling is to allow a detective to get to that stage where he or she can apply one of those techniques sooner, faster, more effectively, more efficiently. Geographic profiling developed from my doctoral research in the School of Criminology at Simon Fraser University. My senior supervisor, my PhD committee, was a person by the name of Paul Brantingham, who, along with his wife Patricia Brantingham, another professor at SFU, had developed a theoretical model that helped determine where crimes are likely to happen based on where an offender lived, worked, played, and their movement routes between those locations. I wondered if it would be possible to reverse their model, to, instead of figuring out where crimes might happen, to instead determine where somebody most likely lived based on the known locations of crimes. That implied, of course, that you could only work with a series of crimes, and you had to connect those series of crimes together. The core of what we do is mapping and analyzing spatial patterns. So we're going to want to see maps. We have a meeting with the investigator, talk with them about their case. We try to give them some idea what geographic profiling can do for them. We're going to take a look at photographs if they're available. Then we like to visit the crime sites. Typically we'll want to see the sites at least twice, once in the daytime when we can actually see them, and the other at the nighttime, because many of these crimes take place at night. This is actually a pretty good spot for him. It's quiet, remote, except for a few coyotes. So after we see all the sites and sort of get a sense of what the surrounding area is like, and let me just say by surrounding area, I might mean, is there a bus route nearby? Is there a 24-hour convenience store? How did the offender know of this location? What other of their routine activities might have been critical? Then we'll input the locations of the crimes into a piece of geographic profiling software called Rigel, named after a star in the constellation Orion the Hunter. Nowadays, that's a fairly quick process because we can work right from our laptop and enter the information even while we're at the crime scene. Once all the locational information is put in, the next step is to create what we call a scenario, because not all crime sites will be equally valid in determining where the offender lives. Once the scenario is created, we can run our geographic profile. And even though this might involve hundreds of thousands or even a couple of million calculations, with modern computer technology, this can be literally done in 3 or 4 seconds. This produces for us a color map, which we call, on a 2-dimensional level, a geoprofile, and a 3-dimensional version, we call it a Jeopardy surface. Whenever you look at an old case, and bear in mind, while this happened in the 1960s, that's still 38 years ago, that's fairly significant if you consider the advancements in the methodology of police investigations and forensic science. So to some degree, you have to do both a case analysis and do some historical research. For example, what did the city of Vallejo look like in 1969? Its population, has probably tripled since that time period, so it's not the same city in 2007 that it was back in 1969. My general impression of the Zodiac case was that it was a San Francisco case. The last crime is the one that perhaps got the most attention, and we're most familiar with the investigators from the San Francisco Police Department. And I guess I had always thought the Zodiac was stalking the people of San Francisco. In reality, he was not. He was stalking people in the Vallejo area, with the last crime being in San Francisco. When I entered the sites into the Rigel software system and ran the analysis, the focus was on a certain area of Vallejo. Probably, I would say, the peak area was the northwest part of Vallejo, Rancho Vallejo, also including Mare Island, the naval shipyard there. And then it curves around, and there's the possibility of some locations in the Benicia area. Now, if we consider the likely military experience or connection that the Zodiac had because of his shoes and because of some of his actions, this is interesting supportive evidence that maybe he was based at Mare Island. He might have lived there at that time. Maybe he worked there and lived in Rancho Vallejo. Maybe worked in Rancho Vallejo, had worked at Mare Island one time, was now retired, or no longer with the military, maybe de-enlisted, and worked somewhere else, for example, Benicia. So there's a number of possibilities, but we remember that Rancho Vallejo was maybe 26,000 people at that time, of which only 13,000 will be male, and of which only a certain portion of those are the correct age, and a certain portion of those are only going to be white. And then we start looking at the neighborhoods involved. We actually have a pretty small subset. Then we start combining that with some of the personal and behavioral descriptors, and then we work in the vehicle information. If this case was active today, it would not be too difficult to find this person. There's been a number of noted suspects or theories of suspects that have been put forward in this case. The only one that I'm aware of that matches the geographic profile is Arthur Lee Allen. But before we go down that path too far, Arthur Lee Allen seems to be excluded multiple times over by forensic evidence, and be very clear here that forensic evidence is much more powerful than any sort of profiling information can be. What sometimes is useful, though, is if you have a suspect that has been excluded, maybe other suspects like him or in the same sort of circumstances. So that's worthwhile considering. The role of a profile is to help identify possible suspects for follow-up. Once they've been eliminated by other means, we have to move on.